welcome. Before we begin the story, I'd like to know where you're listening from and what time you like to listen to these kinds of stories. I read your comments. Without further delay, let's get started. If you ever receive a package with no return address, and inside there's something that looks like an official document but smells of someone else's fear, do one thing. Don't touch it with your bare hands. I touched it, and from that night on I know that in certain places beneath Warsaw, silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is a command. I work as a maintenance technician. Night shifts at the airbase had their perks. Fewer people, less talking, more work that actually means something. You check the generators, the power lines, the hangar carts, the gates, the security systems. Something breaks, you fix it. Something works, you leave it alone. Simple rules that keep a man sane. A week before all of this, I came home in the morning, still with that metallic taste in my mouth from the vending machine coffee. On the doormat sat a box, just a plain cardboard box. No return address, no signature. Only my full name printed so neatly, it looked like someone had a machine better than most government offices. I brought it inside because it felt wrong to leave it there. I opened it with a box cutter. Slowly, the way you open things that might be a joke. Inside was a thin folder and a notebook in a plastic cover. On the first page someone had written in Polish, working translation. I flipped through the pages. The text was dry and technical, the kind you read at training sessions. Except these sentences didn't match our procedures, and at the same time they sounded strangely familiar. Hangar procedures, service zone, gate preparation, internal transport, acoustic isolation, personnel exposure time. All laid out like a recipe for something you shouldn't be cooking in an ordinary kitchen. The worst part was one particular phrase, inserted several times like a watermark, in accordance with solutions used at Area 51. Someone had scribbled in pencil in the margin. Don't confuse this with rumors. This is about habits. I laughed at that, briefly, nervously. I thought, stupid joke. Someone from the base, maybe from security, maybe some new kid from the warehouse who likes these stories. Except the paper was good quality. The translation wasn't amateur work. And a few of the terms, a few of them sounded exactly like the way officers talk when they don't want a civilian to understand too much. At the back of the folder was a sheet with a single line, no signature. Don't make an issue of this. I took a shower, slept through the day, tried to put it out of my mind. That night I went in for my shift. The base after dark has a different smell. During the day you catch fuel, grease, hot metal. At night the moisture from the forest rolls in, along with that particular chill of concrete. Security at the gate as usual. A quick nod, a glance at the badge, a wave through. Except that night the guard I'd known for months didn't look me in the eye. He stared somewhere over my shoulder, as if someone more important were standing behind me. The workshop was quiet. Two guys were working on a pump for one of the carts. I had the day's fault log. Around midnight the internal phone rang. I heard a dispatcher's voice, but not the one I knew. The tone was calm, too calm. He said I was to go to the service gate at the hangar, the one we don't normally enter without clearance. He said the porton required urgent attention and that it was a priority. I asked whether there was a ticket in the system. He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing whether to answer. Then he said only, there is. I grabbed my tool bag, my headlamp, my gloves. On the way out I felt the locker key digging into my pants pocket. Such a small thing, and suddenly it felt important. The path to the hangars ran through lit taxiways and dead quiet yards. The sodium lamps through yellow pools, and between them was a darkness where everything seems larger. I could hear my own footsteps and the distant hum of the generators. Nothing else. When I reached the service gate, I understood why they'd sent me in person. The metal was warm. Not a little warm, not sun-warmed, warm like a radiator in the middle of winter. And yet it had been cold and damp for hours, the sky starless. I pressed my glove against it, and felt a temperature through the fabric that had no business being there. In several spots the paint looked as though it had been scorched. No smoke, no flame, just that characteristic bubbling that comes from intense heat. I crouched down at the track mechanism. The grease was fresh but mixed with something black, like soot. Then I heard footsteps. Two men came around the corner in uniforms, but not like ours. No patches, no names. One had his cap pulled low. The other held a tablet as if he'd just been taking photos. They didn't say good evening. One of them simply pointed at the lock and said, "Fix it." I reflexively tried to make a joke, that the gate must have been welded shut, that someone had done work here without filing a report. I didn't finish the sentence, because the one with the tablet raised his eyes and looked at me the way you look at a screw that won't turn. Less talk, more work. I started disassembling the housing. Inside the wires were melted. The insulation showed signs of a strong electrical arc, except there was no typical smell of burning. Instead there was a chemical smell, like solvent and ozone at the same time. I worked in silence. The uniformed men stood beside me, too close, as if they were afraid I'd run off with a wrench. Whenever I needed to step back to reach a new cable, one of them moved with me. Like a shadow, at a certain point the gate shuddered, the mechanism caught. The metal groaned and shifted a few centimeters, and through the gap I saw something. Light inside the hangar, white and sharp, the kind you find in an operating room. And something else, something that looked like part of an enormous tarpaulin, blackened out, as if it were covering something of an irregular shape. I wanted to look longer, but one of the uniformed men stepped directly into my line of sight. Finish, he said. I finished. The gate started moving more smoothly, though it was still unnaturally warm. The uniformed man didn't thank me. The one with the tablet noted something and said, "Go back." On the way to the workshop, one question kept circling in my head. Where was that heat coming from? What were they doing in the hangar that made the gate heat up like a furnace? And why me? I decided to check something simple, the access log. At our place, everything runs on keycards. Every passage, every gate, every door is recorded. Always. We used to joke it was like a book of sins, only electronic. If you do something stupid, the system remembers it. I went to the room with the security monitoring computer. I had access as a technician, not to everything, but to enough to find the gate I just worked on. I searched for it, entered the date, the time, the filter, pulled up the list, and saw my name. Several entries at times when I'd been asleep at home, made with my card. The storage gate, the door to the technical corridor, and then the one that froze me solid, entry to the zone near the hangar. All logged like clockwork, as if someone had been walking the base as me. At first I thought, system error, but then I remembered the package. Don't make an issue of this. I remembered the guards look at the gate, and I remembered those two men without names. My throat went dry. I moved away from the monitor. The room was silent except for the hum of the computer fan. And then in the screen, in the dark reflection, I saw someone's silhouette behind me. I spun around sharply. Standing there was my supervisor, the shift manager. A man who normally takes everything as a joke, who can curse and laugh at the same time. Now there was nothing of that left in him. "What are you doing?" he asked. I told him the truth, but only half of it. That I was checking the gate logs, that there had been a report, that the wires were melted, that something didn't add up. I didn't mention the package. I don't know why. Instinct maybe. He looked at the screen, then at me, and he wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. "Close it," he said quietly, "and don't come back here." "But someone is using my card," I whispered. "Someone could be setting me up, setting you up," he repeated, as if the phrase were childish. "You're worried about paperwork, and this is about something that isn't meant for you." I took a step back. Then I heard another phone ring, not from dispatch this time, but his personal work phone. He answered, listened, nodded twice, hung up. He looked me in the eye for the first time that night. "Come with me," he said. He led me not to the hangar, but to a room nearby, a small office with a metal table. Someone else was waiting there, a man in civilian clothes but with a military bearing. A folder lay on the table. The civilian stood up, shook my hand, didn't give his name. He told me to sit down. "This is a routine conversation," he began. "A technical incident has occurred. It requires a formal record." He pushed the folder across. Inside was a sheet describing the fault, and beneath it a declaration stating that the work had been carried out in accordance with procedure, and that no irregularities had been observed. I was supposed to sign it. "No irregularities observed," I said before I could stop myself. "The gate was hot, the wires were melted. That's not normal." The civilian didn't change his tone. He smiled just slightly, the way a man smiles when he hears something predictable. He glanced at the name on my badge. "Technician," he said, "faults happen. Your job is to fix them, not interpret them." And my name in the logs slipped out of me. At that the supervisor flinched, as if someone had jabbed him. The civilian laid his hand on the folder slowly, like someone closing a lid over someone's fingers. "Trust me," he said quietly. "You don't want to discuss this out loud." In my head appeared that note from the package. "Don't make an issue of this." And now that sentence came back in a sharper version, closer. "If you sign, you go back to work. If you don't sign, we'll start asking questions, real ones, about your card, about your entries, about your whereabouts. And it may turn out that you have a problem no wrench can fix." I sat as if welded to the chair. I felt something inside me screaming to stand up and walk out, but my legs wouldn't move. It wasn't courage or fear in the cinematic sense. It was the feeling of having landed inside a mechanism larger than yourself, one that's already turning. I signed the civilian, took the paper, put it in the folder, and stood. On his way out, he said one sentence that sounded like advice but was an order. "Don't ask questions, especially not out loud." I walked out of there with hands greasy from the work and a clean signature on a lie. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. I fixed things that suddenly felt safe by comparison. Blown fuses, loose bolts, a leaking valve. Normality was a bandage on an open wound. Toward morning I went to the locker room. I opened my metal locker. Inside were my clothes, my thermos, my towel, and something else that hadn't been there the day before. A small patch, embroidered, in colors of sand and black. In the center was the word Groom Lake. Beside it lay a slip of paper, plain, no signature. Just one sentence printed in neat block letters. Don't ask questions out loud. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't understand why someone had put this in my locker. Was it a threat, a joke, a sign that I now belonged to some game whose rules I didn't know? But one thing I understood very clearly. Someone has access to my place, my name, my card, my silence. I took the patch and put it in my pocket. I left the slip behind. Not because I was brave, but because I was afraid that if I took it, it would look as though I'd accepted something more than I should have. At home I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the warm metal of the gate and the white light through the gap. I kept hearing that sentence. Don't ask questions out loud. 2 days later I went to Human Resources and filed a transfer request. I said health reasons, family. I can't keep doing night shifts. A lie, but the kind that protects you. The HR manager looked at me, clicked something on her computer, and said there was no possibility at this time. No emotion, no sympathy, like a machine. That evening my supervisor called. He told me not to do anything foolish, to come back to my shift. He also said something else, quietly, like a man afraid of his own words. Don't do this, don't fight it, it will grind you down. I didn't go. I turned off my phone. I sat in my apartment with the lights off, as if waiting for something that was coming. And nothing came that night. But the next morning, when I went out to throw away the trash, I saw a new notice on the stairwell door, the kind that looks like it's from building management. Someone had stuck it on with fresh glue. At the bottom in small print was an addition no one but me would have noticed. Silence is a procedure. I still have the Groom Lake patch today. It sits in a drawer between old work gloves and screws that might come in handy someday. Sometimes I take it out and look at it like evidence that this really happened and wasn't a dream after a night shift. And every time someone on television makes a joke about secret bases and says they probably keep who knows what in there, I feel like saying something, but I don't. Because I learned the one thing someone very much wanted to drill into my head. Certain questions aren't dangerous because they have an answer. They're dangerous because someone hears you when you say them out loud. When people ask me whether you can truly be frightened working security monitoring, I always answer the same way. Fear doesn't come when you see something strange. Fear comes when someone tells you that you've already seen it and orders you to sign your name to it. My name is Paweł. I work as a camera operator at a private research facility on the outskirts of Wrocław. It's not a place from a movie. No flying saucers, no aliens, no mysterious flashes. Just ordinary laboratories, ordinary corridors, ordinary people in lab coats, and an ordinary security booth where you sit at night, drink cold coffee, and stare at screens until your eyes ache from the blue light. Or at least that's how it was until they rolled out the update. It started innocuously. New camera management software was supposed to make the job easier, automate reports, improve security. I remember the IT department's email had the standard boilerplate about minor naming errors, in zones possibly occurring during the first few days. Nobody likes an update like that, but everyone swallows it because there's no alternative. The first night after the rollout I turned on the system, logged in with my credentials, and the facility map panel took longer than usual to load. A notification about zone name synchronization appeared at the top. When the map finally came up, I froze. We'd always had straightforward names. Corridor A, storage, main entrance, server room, laboratory 3. Now instead of that I saw something that didn't belong in any Polish building. Esquadro Pista, hangar. The names were in lowercase, as if someone had copied them from something foreign, and hadn't even bothered to standardize them. Pista in Poland, hangar in the middle of a research facility, and that S4 written as if the S weren't a letter, but something that carried meaning on its own. I might have laughed, except for one thing. The layout of the zones on the map also looked different, as if someone had overlaid our building with a foreign blueprint, an alien skeleton, and was trying to force it to fit. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself, translation error, some kind of joke, IT thing, someone uploaded test names. At night a person can talk himself into things, but then the recording started. In monitoring work the biggest part of the job is boredom. For long hours nothing happens. And when something does happen, it's usually someone who forgot their badge or a cleaning person going the wrong way. Real incidents are rare, which is why an operator's mind becomes finely tuned to patterns, to the same steps at the same times, to the same faces, to the same rituals. I didn't know this man. I saw him for the first time on the camera in the corridor the new system had labeled as 4. He was tall and slim, in a dark jacket with no logo. He walked at a quick pace, without hesitation, like someone who knows the way. His hood was down, his face partly in shadow. What stood out most was that he had no badge, At our place everyone, even outside contractors, wears their card on a lanyard or clipped to a pocket. He had nothing. Before I could zoom in, I moved toward the passageway that had always been problematic on camera. A spot where the fluorescent lights flickered and the image went dark for a second. A minor thing, really, but enough that for a fraction of a second the details disappeared. When he appeared on the next camera, he was already gone. I assumed he'd gone through a side door or turned into a recess, which seemed normal enough until I saw him a second time. This time the camera showed a different corridor on the far side of the facility. The new system labeled this section hangar. We don't have a hangar. What we do have is a large hall with equipment, where trucks occasionally pull in with deliveries. We used to call it simply the logistics hall. Now it was hangar. On screen the man appeared too quickly. I know the transit times. Even running. You can't cross from one end to the other in a minute without passing any cameras. Yet he appeared there, as if he'd taken a shortcut the system couldn't see. On top of that, he always entered the frame so that for a fraction of a second he was in partial shadow, as though he knew where each camera had a weaker contrast, as though he knew the spots we called blind points, not where the camera doesn't reach, but where the image is momentarily worse. Reflections, flickering, shadows. That nagged at me. I started scrolling through the archive. The software after the update had a new module for intelligent tracking. You click on a subject and the system tries to pull frames from subsequent cameras, where the same subject appears. In theory, it was supposed to help security. In practice, the module lost track at the slightest thing. A hat, a coat, a backpack. But with this man it worked too well. It showed me sequences in which he appeared and vanished in logical locations, except the timestamps were illogical. I saw him on Escuro, then on Hangar, then on Pista. Pista designated in the system the side corridor along the perimeter fence, where there's a narrow strip of asphalt for emergency vehicle access. Nobody calls it Pista, yet there it was, and always the same pattern. Appears, vanishes at a point of weaker light, appears somewhere else too soon. After the third night I'd had enough. I called the duty officer from the external security team, the one who walks the facility. I told him to watch out for a tall man with no badge. He answered in a tired voice that there was nobody like that today, that everyone was where they were supposed to be, that the corridors were empty. Then who's on the cameras? I asked. A moment of silence. Powell, don't play games. If you have a problem with the software, write to IT. He hung up before I could say another word. That was the first punch to the gut. The second came when I went into the server logs. In our booth, we have access to the recording panel, but not to the raw files. The raw files are kept in the server room, accessible only to IT and the security manager. But as an operator, I have permission to view the system logs, or at least that was true before the update. After the update, a new tab appeared in the panel. System events. You click it and see a list. Who logged in, which cameras were offline, which recordings were exported. One night, when I couldn't look at those zone names anymore, I started digging through the logs and found something that looked like a fingerprint on clean glass. A series of entries: export initiated, clip removed, retention override. Usually these entries have descriptions. Camera number, reason, user. Here the reason field was empty, but the clip label, a label that neither I nor anyone from security had assigned, read Groom. One word, no Polish characters, no added note. Groom, as in Groom Lake. That association came to me not because I believe in conspiracy theories, but because it's hard to avoid if you work in security and occasionally read about procedures. My brain connected it to those names: Esquor, Hangar, Pista, as if someone had copied a map from something associated with an American military base and dumped it into our system. I didn't want to go there at all. It sounded like a ridiculous premise for a bad story, and I hate stories like that, so I found a simpler explanation. Someone gave the clip the label Groom as a project code name. Companies love code names. Maybe Groom is the name of a new module. Maybe Hangar and Pista are translation errors. Maybe S4 is Zone 4, abbreviated by the system. That's what I kept telling myself until the message came from the security chief. A window popped up in the lower right corner of the screen from the internal chat. Come to the conference room. Now. At night in an empty building. That now sounds different. I closed the panel, grabbed my jacket and walked the corridor to the admin area. On the way I passed cameras I knew by heart. I felt their lenses on the back of my neck, even though I know it's just glass and metal. Even so, I had the feeling that someone was sitting on the other side watching me exactly the way I watch people on the monitors. In the conference room sat the security chief and one person from IT. The IT person had a laptop and a cable, as if about to give a presentation. The chief set a folder down in front of me. Powell, he said calmly. We need to close a certain matter. What matter? I asked. He opened the folder. On top was a document, not a report, not a request, but a ready-made statement. The header read, Confirmation of observation of event. Below that, a sentence that tightened my throat. I, the undersigned, hereby confirm that on the date in question, while on duty, I observed on the monitoring system an incident involving the entry of an unauthorized individual into the zone, and then further details. Camera, zone labeled as 4, then passage to hangar, then something about a silence protocol and no trace in the access control system. I read it and felt the heat rise in my face. I didn't observe any such thing, I said. The security chief didn't change his expression. You did, he replied, as if stating the obvious. The system recorded it. We just need a signature. The system could have recorded anything, I muttered. I'm not signing something I didn't see. Then the IT person spoke quietly, without emotion. The logs show your activity. Clip preview, zoom, export. That wasn't me, I blurted. And only a moment later did it hit me how that sounded, like a child caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The chief slid another sheet toward me. This time it was a login list. My name, my ID, timestamps, and among them several entries at times when I'd been at home. I recognized those hours because I have a routine. I know when I step out for a break, when I make a bathroom round, when I switch cameras. But these were logins at times when I wasn't even in the building. This is an error, I whispered. The security chief leaned forward. This isn't an error, Powell. This is a problem, and we need to close it. I understood this wasn't a request. It wasn't a discussion about procedures. It was pressure. Why should I sign a statement saying I saw something I didn't see? I asked, trying to sound calm. The chief looked me straight in the eye. Because otherwise we'll have to conclude that someone is using your credentials without your knowledge. Which means you've lost control of your access. And then he paused. You won't be able to work here, and not only here. The job of camera operator is a joke to people on the outside. Nobody thinks of it as a career. But it's an industry where reputation is everything. One note about negligence, and no one will take you on, because everyone is afraid of the risk. I felt my stomach clench, not because I was afraid of being fired. I was afraid of what not only here meant. And those clips labeled groom, I pressed. Who's deleting them? Why are there zones called pista and hangar in the system? The security chief was quiet for a moment, then closed the folder. That is not your concern. It is my concern, because someone is using my account as a dumping ground, I said, sharper than I intended. Someone is entering logins under my name, deleting recordings, and now you want me to sign off on witnessing an incident. What for? The IT person glanced at the chief. The chief glanced at the IT person, and then I heard an answer I will never forget for the rest of my life. Powell, the chief said very quietly. Your job is to watch, not to understand. I left the room without signing. I said I needed to think it over, that I'd go back to the booth, that I'd write up an explanation. They agreed, but in their agreement was something that sounded like, you'll do what needs to be done. I went back to the monitoring booth and locked myself in. The booth door always had a small window, but I pulled the blind down over it. I sat in silence, only the computer fan humming. I did something I shouldn't have done. I started checking the cameras, not to watch over the facility, but to find evidence that someone was watching me. I pulled up views from the cameras covering the corridor outside the booth, the entrance to the security building, and even a section of the parking lot. And then I saw something that made my mouth go dry. On the camera trained on the corridor in front of the booth, the image looked ordinary, empty light, white walls. But in the corner of the screen, a small icon was blinking that I hadn't seen before. Observation mode. Not recording, not monitoring. Observation. I clicked to see the details. The system displayed information. Event active. Operator. That was me. I kept clicking, frantic now. Tabs, logs, reports, and finally I landed on something that looked like a task list auto-generated by the system. Object, operator, location, a booth, internal camera. Status, active. And below that, risk unknown. That last part shouldn't have been there. The monitoring system doesn't assess the risk level of the operator. The system assesses risk within the facility. Open doors, unauthorized movement, sabotage. Not a person sitting in front of a screen. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the feeling you get when you suddenly realize that the mirrors in the room you're in aren't mirrors at all, just one-way glass. Then, as if on cue, the man flickered on one of the monitors. He appeared on the camera labeled S4. Exactly the same spot, in the partial shadow, in the flicker of the fluorescent light. This time, however, he didn't walk on. He stopped and looked directly into the camera. Not to the side, not somewhere beside it, straight into the lens, as if he knew I was sitting on the other side. For a moment I thought, coincidence, but his head tilted very slightly, as if he were examining something, and then he made a small gesture with his hand. Not a wave, something more deliberate, like a signal. At that same instant my screen froze for a second, a micro-lag. The frame stopped, the sound of the fan seemed to dim, and the system threw up a message. Loss of synchronization restoring. When the image came back, the man was gone. Instead, a new entry appeared in the logs. A clip removed, label groom. And worse, the user listed was my ID. I stood up so abruptly the chair screeched. For a second I wanted to burst out of the booth, run to the server room, do anything. But then I looked at the camera covering the booth entrance. I saw myself, not in a reflection, but in the live feed. I had been sitting a moment ago. Now I was standing. The camera watched me without expression, and in the corner of the screen the observation mode icon blinked like a heartbeat. I understood that this system was not designed to detect an intruder in the building. This system was designed to detect an intruder among the people who have access, to detect whether an operator was starting to ask questions. I began thinking through everything that had happened in recent nights. The strange zone names, the man slipping through the shadow points, the clips labeled groom, the document I was supposed to sign. This wasn't paranoia. It was a procedure. Someone had loaded into our system a map, names, mechanisms that looked borrowed from some other security culture, and someone was testing how I would react, how long I would keep believing it was a software glitch. Then another message appeared in the chat, signature on the documents by morning. Just that. I sat and stared at the screen, one thought in my head. If I sign, I confirm a lie. If I don't sign, I become a risk. In the end, I did the simplest thing. I turned off the computer. The silence that fell was unnatural. The monitors went dark. The booth grew darker. For a moment I felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my neck. But the relief was brief, because from the corridor came a sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, unhurried. The sound of someone walking exactly where they intended to go. I froze. Nobody should be in the booth. The external security guard does rounds through the facility, but at this hour he always checks in over the radio first. There had been no call. The radio was silent. The steps stopped outside the door. The handle moved slightly, once, twice, as if someone were checking whether it was locked. Then silence. I stood motionless, one hand on the desk, as if the desk could protect me. Through the small darkened window I could see nothing because the blind was drawn, but I felt a presence on the other side, the way you feel someone standing too close. Then there were two knocks, short, without aggression, the way a coworker knocks when they've come to deal with something. "Powell," I heard a quiet male voice, neutral. My pulse spiked. How did he know I was inside when the monitors were dark? How did he know I hadn't left? "Open up." I didn't move. I swallowed an answer as quietly as I could. "Who's there?" A pause, as if someone were weighing the answer. "Observation," the voice said. "Active mode." That wasn't a name. That was a word from the system. I felt the cold wash over me, and then I realized something else. Even if the door held, even if nobody got in, I no longer had control. Because the system that was supposed to give me a view of the world could be shut down with a single click, and I would be left in the dark. Eventually the footsteps moved away. Slowly, without urgency, as if this hadn't been an attempt to break in but a test. I stood in silence for a long time, until finally I dared to turn the computer back on. The system booted up on its own, faster than it should have, as if it hadn't been fully shut down, as if someone had been waiting. On screen appeared a window with the document, the same one I was supposed to sign. Except now at the bottom was already my electronic mark. Not a full signature, just my initials, the same ones used in the login system. I hadn't done that. And beside it in the system events panel, a new entry had appeared. Compliance confirmed. Then it fully hit me, what this had all been about, what someone on the outside might call the final reveal. It wasn't about guarding the laboratories. It wasn't about catching an intruder. It wasn't about the hangar or the pista. It was about finding out whether I, the operator, would be compliant. Whether I would accept that someone could place someone else's memories in my hands and tell me to sign off on them. Whether I would let myself be locked inside a procedural framework, where truth is whatever the system records. The next morning I handed in my badge and said I was resigning. No explanations, no scene, I simply walked out. And to this day, whenever I pass a camera in a store, at a gas station, in a stairwell, I have the reflex to look into the lens. Because I know that sometimes cameras aren't watching the world. Sometimes they're watching you. And the worst part is that in those moments you don't know whether you're the person doing the observing, or the object that has just been tagged as operator. Before I tell you how this started, there's one thing you need to understand. When someone can say your first name and your address in the tone of someone reading a shopping list, you know it isn't a joke. And when they do it through a recording that was only supposed to be a translation job, it gets even worse. My name is Marta. I'm a freelance translator. I live in Krakow and I usually work alone. Laptop, headphones, coffee from the machine on the corner, hours of silence. My assignments are dull. Contracts, manuals, medical paperwork sometimes. I'm good and fast and I don't ask unnecessary questions. That last part turned out to be my mistake. It all began on a Monday evening when I was coming back from the library on Rajska Street. Light rain was falling, the Krakow kind, the sort that seems like nothing but soaks your sleeves in 5 minutes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, unknown number. I normally don't pick up, but I was having a rough week, bills, rent, and that one word I kept repeating in my head, accept. I answered. Good evening, Miss Marta, said a male voice, calm, without a trace of emotion. We need a quick translation, payment in cash, up front. This evening. The fact that he knew my name wasn't unusual yet. It happened that someone got my number through a referral, but the tone was that of a person speaking to someone he'd known for a very long time. What kind of text? I asked. Interview procedures, conversation protocols. Nothing complicated, no sensitive data, he added. We just don't want a bank transfer on record. Cash. Cash always sounds like trouble, but then he named a figure that made me stop dead on the sidewalk outside the vegetable shop while raindrops started running down the back of my neck. When can I get the files? I asked, more carefully than I'd planned. A link in a moment, a password in a second message. Please don't share. Standard. He hung up before I could ask for a company name. At home, I opened my laptop. Maybe 5 minutes passed before the message arrived. A short link, and then a password written oddly. No Polish characters, but with excessive care for capitalization. I clicked. A folder appeared containing a document and several audio files. File title. Interview procedures. Nothing else. I opened the document and felt that moment when your body knows something before your mind does. The text was in English, technical and cold. Not an HR manual, something that read like an interrogation handbook. Questions are to be asked in a fixed sequence. Emotional responses are to be treated as interference. In the event of escalation, apply the silencing protocol. Silencing, not calming. Silencing, I scrolled further, reading faster. Fragments began appearing that looked like quotations from conversations, responses from witnesses, former employees, people with access. And then I hit words that pressed my fingers into the keyboard as if someone had shoved me from behind. In the event of guilt emerging, apply the procedure. Disengage guilt. Disengage guilt like turning off a light in a corridor. It got worse further on. The questions were structured to strip someone of their humanity, to leave only function behind. Do you remember, sir, ma'am, the moment when this ceased to be a person and became material? Were restraints used before the subject understood it was being evaluated? Was technical silence in effect in the hangar? Hangar, subject, material, technical silence, and in several places a word recurred. Guild off, written like the name of a button. At the end of the introduction came a sentence that seemed designed to create an impression. Procedures developed on the basis of materials from the Nevada testing area, known in popular culture as Area 51. Area 51 read like a hook, like bait, like something meant to make a person feel part of a secret. For a moment I even laughed nervously. Fine, someone wants me to translate fanfiction formatted as a technical manual. Good pay, so be it. That's what I told myself. I got to work. Word by word I rendered cold into cold technical English into dry Polish. At some point I stopped paying attention to the content. I focused on the rhythm of the sentences, on the consistency of the terminology. Rule: don't engage emotionally or you'll lose your mind. Except the emotions came on their own. In the middle of the document appeared a heading, Adaptive Section. Calibration to the translator. I froze. This was supposed to be a translation assignment, not a training exercise. Yet under the heading were example questions, to be incorporated when the interview conductor has difficulty maintaining control. And in those examples, specific details began to appear. My details. Do you remember, ma'am, being afraid of the dark hallway in your grandmother's apartment as a child? I read that 3 times. I told myself coincidence, a literary device. But then the next one. Do you prefer to sit by the window on the tram so you can see your reflection in the glass? That was me too. I'd always done that. And do you place your phone face down when someone enters the room? On instinct I looked at my phone. It was lying face down. I felt warmth flood my face and then drain away, leaving a chill under my skin. These weren't general descriptions. These were my habits, things I'd never mentioned to anyone because there was no reason to. Then I remembered, payment in cash this evening. Pick up. I wrote to the number. I need an explanation. The text contains information about me. Where did you get it? The reply came quickly. It's part of the procedure. Please continue translating. Payment unchanged. Pick up in an hour. I'll send the address. I closed my eyes. I thought about ignoring all of it. Deleting the folder, blocking the number, reporting it somewhere. But where? To the police? I received a document about Area 51. Someone knows my address. I'd sound like someone with problems. Besides, I was afraid that if I did something sudden, whoever this was would become less polite. I went back to work, but now I read every sentence like a blade. The text was full of instruments. How to conduct a conversation so that a person confesses to things they didn't do. How to extinguish resistance. How to speak calmly until the other side starts shouting, because silence is worse than noise. What frightened me most was that it didn't sound like fiction. It sounded like something someone actually uses. And then in the document came another insert, too personal to be coincidence. If the translator pauses at a paragraph and takes a break, activate the element simulating the sound of keys in the corridor. At that exact moment, as if someone had staged it, I heard from the stairwell the jangle of keys. Someone was wrestling with the neighbor's lock. Ordinary? Right. Except my body reacted as if someone had punched me in the stomach. I stood up, went to the door, looked through the peephole. Nobody. Just the light in the hallway and shadows. I went back to the laptop and felt that someone was playing me like a pawn, that this wasn't an assignment but a test. Soon the pickup address arrived. I opened the message and went cold. It wasn't some office district. It was an address in the city center, in a part of the city I knew. And worst of all, 2 streets from my apartment. Second floor, office. The intercom works. Please come alone. Cash in an envelope, alone. Of course, I wrote back, I'm not coming. Transfer payment or I'm out. Reply. Cash. Alone. Brief, like a command. For several minutes, I sat in silence staring at the cursor. Then I put on my jacket and picked up my keys. Not because I wanted to, only because I felt that if I didn't go, they would come here, and then I wouldn't even have the illusion of control that leaving your own home on your own legs gives you. Just to be safe, I started an audio recording on my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and texted a friend. If I don't reply within an hour, call me. I didn't give details. I was embarrassed to sound like someone who was paranoid. Krakow at night was wet and luminous. The streets glistened with reflections. People moved quickly, wrapped in scarves. Life, normality, and me walking with my laptop in my bag as if carrying a bomb. The address turned out to be an old tenement building. Heavy metal gate, the kind you always have to push hard. Inside it smelled of damp and dust. The stairs creaked. Second floor, a door with frosted glass and no nameplate. Just a small buzzer. I pressed it. Click. The lock released. The door swung open on its own. Inside it was quiet. A narrow corridor, cold white light. Nothing on the walls. No posters, no certificates, nothing to say we are a company. Hello? I called. Nobody answered. At the end of the corridor stood a desk, and on it a white envelope and a USB drive that I had not brought with me. I swear I had no USB drive in my bag. I walked over slowly. The envelope had one word on it. Marta. I picked it up. It was heavy. Cash. But inside was also a small printed slip that looked like an excerpt from a manual. The translator must understand that she is part of the procedure. The sense of choice is an illusion. If she asks, activate the reminder. At the bottom of the slip. Guild off. I wanted to run, but at that same moment I heard a sound behind me, very faint, like someone drawing a fingernail across glass. I turned. In the doorway, which had been open a moment ago, stood a woman. I couldn't see her face clearly because the light from the corridor behind her cast a shadow. She was in a coat, hair tied back. She looked like someone who could work in an office, in an agency, in a firm, an ordinary woman. Miss Marta, she asked calmly. Yes, I answered, feeling my voice break. Thank you. Please hand over the files. What files? I blurted. Where did you get information about me? Then she tilted her head slightly, as if confirming I had done exactly what they'd expected. Please don't ask questions out loud, she said. It was the exact same sentence, in the exact same tone, as in the recording. I froze. I took my laptop out of my bag and handed it to her as if on autopilot. She took it without hurry, sat down at the desk, opened it, and plugged in the USB drive that I supposedly didn't have. She sat there clicking, as if making a copy of the document she herself had sent me. Then I noticed something else. On the desk beside the envelope lay a thick binder, written on the spine in black marker in Polish. Interview procedures, Krakow. Not Nevada, not the United States. Krakow. I felt my mind go blank and then fill with a single thought. This didn't come from America, it was from here. And then, as if my brain had decided to save me, it threw me a lifeline. Check the metadata. While she was clicking, I raised my eyes to the screen. I caught a glimpse of the file properties window. Author name, source path, something you can sometimes see if someone hasn't cleaned it up. I saw the path, and there among the folder names appeared the word that finished me. A company name in Polish, not American, and beneath it, the city, Krakow. The woman closed the laptop and handed it back to me as if returning something she'd borrowed. That's all, she said. Why? I started. She silenced me with a single look. No aggression, simply. The way a manager looks when she's tired of explanations. You already know too much to not know it, she said quietly. And please remember, guilt can be disengaged like other things. I felt sick. I couldn't tell if she was threatening me, briefing me, or both. I turned and walked to the door. I tried to open it, but the handle didn't give. I pulled harder. Nothing. Then, after a second, maybe two, the lock clicked and the door released, as if someone had wanted to show me that even leaving was part of the procedure. I ran down the stairs nearly all the way, but stopped halfway because I heard footsteps behind me. 1, 2, slow and steady. She wasn't running. She didn't need to. I didn't look back. I ran out onto the street and the cold air hit my face like a slap. Did someone follow me out? I don't know. There were people everywhere. Cars, laughter, a tram stop. And I suddenly felt like a child who'd gotten lost in a shopping mall. I walked home by a different route. I changed streets twice. I went through a shop to check the reflection in the window. Anyone behind me? No one specific, just ordinary people. At home, I locked the door with both locks. I sat on the floor in the hallway with the envelope in my lap. The money smelled of paper and something else, like someone's perfume. I felt an immediate revulsion toward it. I opened my laptop. Everything was as I'd left it. The folder still existed, but the files were gone. An empty folder as if nothing had ever been there. Only one new file on the desktop, with no name. An audio icon. I didn't remember saving it there. I clicked it. From the speakers came the same calm voice as before. This time it wasn't saying my address. It was saying something worse because it sounded like a summary. Thank you for your participation. Please remember, one does not speak about procedures. Procedures work best when they are invisible. A pause. And then, as if someone wanted to be particularly precise, the source document came from an office in Krakow, 2 streets from your home. You discovered that. This means you are capable of working under pressure. Another pause. If you wish to end the collaboration, please disengage guilt. It makes the decision easier. The recording ended. I sat for a long time without moving. I didn't even cry. I just thought about how easily someone can walk into your life when they know exactly where to press. And that the worst part of all this wasn't Area 51. That was a lie for the naive. The worst part was that someone in my city, in my neighborhood, had created something they called interview procedures, and it had a built-in mechanism calibrated to a translator. Calibrated to me. The next day I went to the police. I told the truth. But without the words that would have sounded sensational. I spoke of threats, personal data, harassment, a cash-paid assignment. I played the recording. The officer listened, nodded, wrote something on a piece of paper, and asked whether I had seen the other person's face, whether I had the company name, whether there was a witness. I had none of those things. That was exactly the point. I went home. On the doormat lay a small envelope, identical to the one in the office, white, thick. On it one sentence in block capitals. Do not disengage guilt if you want to sleep peacefully. And then I understood. This hadn't been a one-off job. This was the first stage. And I, who had spent my entire life trying to be invisible, had suddenly become material for someone's procedure. From that day on, when I hear keys jangling in the stairwell, I no longer think of my neighbors. I think about the fact that somewhere out there, someone has a folder named after me. And in that folder are questions that haven't been asked yet.